Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson and welcome to Lecture 12B. This is the last lecture before our review that I'll do another quick video on, but we're at the end, and indeed the title kind of mixes or matches the end. Project Closeout and Project Review. We're at the end of the project life cycle. In our studies, we've talked about the closeout process, and starting this process early is important. And closeout is just a word that's used to finish off the project, to close out all the contract requirements that's involved. So we'll look at these items in this particular lecture, and we'll also talk about project review, which is an important aspect of learning. As we've talked about in this course, big part of being successful in construction is continuous learning. And in our previous lecture, if you didn't see that, make sure you go back and you look at lean construction. I think that was lecture 11A or B, or one of those ones, or just a lecture 11, but lean construction. So project closeout is really involved in finishing the project, getting all these little things done. You ever have something that you're doing and then there's a pile of little things before you can finish it off? Well, think of a big project. There is a multitude of little things that you need to finish. And some of these little things aren't as little as you think. So you want to make sure that you've done your due diligence as the project proceeds to not have too many little things at the end. That means fixing things as you go along to minimize the things you have to deal with at the end. So if you start with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey would say, that will be very helpful, because as you proceed, you'll know where the end is and you'll try to minimize the amount of things that'll be dangling towards the end. Some contractors have a lot of problems closing out projects, and the longer it takes you to close out, the more things keep cropping up, and it just becomes this never-ending process. So it's minor details, any late items that may have been outstanding, fixing, and this is really where you get into your punch list, fixing all the little things that don't meet the scope requirements or become damaged, and rework, and all of those other things that we've talked about. Commissioning, testing, and commissioning the equipment. Well, you can't really test it. It hasn't been installed. And so you got to finalize that, make sure that all the documentation that needs to be signed off is done so. If you have a third-party commissioning agent coming in to test the equipment, you also have to make sure that they've provided you with all their reports and the appropriate sign-offs so that you can finalize your closeout documentation. So really, it kind of follows the project work completed. Contractor makes a punch list, a list of the deficiencies or deficiency list. Contractors, subcontractors complete all the items on the punch list. The consultant has to have approved of that, and so then they may also have things that they've identified during this process that still need to be fixed. And so the punch list is completed. Then the architect issues certificate of substantial completion. Substantial completion is not completion. It just means that the building can be used for its intended purposes, right? Contractor completes all the remaining contract requirements. So substantial completion means the the owner can use it for its intended purpose. Doesn't necessarily mean that the punch list is fully completed. There's always still some outstanding items that need to be done, but it's done enough that the client can use it safely. You would have occupancy permit, you would have substantial completion, and now you're working at completing all the remaining contract documents. Maybe it's a LEED certification building. You have to gather all those documentation. All the documentation from the third-party commissioning agent has to be gathered. You may have to complete final training of the facilities team to take over the building. All of these things come into play. And if once everything is done, then the final payment is made, and also the release of retainage. I talked about the Construction Act in the previous video, like lien legislation requirements where there's holdback monies that doesn't get released until everything is closed out. So there's that process. And punch lists, nobody's going to do it. Well, I shouldn't say that. That's a mistake. From a punch list perspective, I would be using some sort of productivity software like the ones that we've discussed in the course. It would be all listed. It would be housed in that productivity software. I'm talking FieldWire, PlanGrid, Procore, Bluebeam, those kind of productivity softwares where you would have it all listed, and then you could get them signed off and checked off that way. And so that allows you to be able to easily track them. Best way to do it. Smaller companies, they're going to do it this way. So smaller companies are going to probably likely do it this way. But if I was a small company, I wouldn't be doing it that way either. I'd be doing it in a productivity software that houses it all. I despise paper because paper gets lost. Paper, just trying to track it all, it's too cumbersome. We have the means, we have the ways. Substantial completion, as I said, means that now it can be used for its intended purposes. That also usually means you're off the hook for liquidated damages. Usually, there's always some exceptions. Can dive into that in another course, but substantial completion is important to establish, and then that usually starts the clock ticking too on the release of holdback amounts, etc. Also, yes, establishes contract warranty period as well. So that's another good point. So certificate of substantial completion, identification, date of issuance, description of project, definition of what substantial completion means in this particular case, and a list of remaining responsibilities. So job isn't done till it's all signed off for. Make sure that all the certifications are signed off. Regulatory authorities have signed off and approved on their particular areas. So that way, from a litigation point of view, that's important to make sure that they've done all their final inspections and they've signed off on the things that they need to sign off for to establish that it is complete. So inspection agency releases, as I was mentioning, so all the regulatory authorities or the authorities having jurisdiction over your project have inspected and approved and released their permit requirements. So you now know that these are all completed and complied with. You have the documentation. That would be part and parcel of the closeout requirements. We mentioned the testing requirements as well, so I think I've already talked about that. And we talked about that in another lecture, what testing and commissioning is, to make sure that the building is actually going to run as it was designed to run. So the equipment is going to function as it was designed to function. That includes life safety equipment, and that includes all the other sort of building automation systems. And all of these points here. Operations, owners manuals, and the operations and equipment manuals and instructions, and those requirements, and facilities training, as I also mentioned, includes in that. So there's usually requirements of the turnover of the manuals and the documents of the equipment that's for this particular facility. Some equipment can be quite extensive, the instructions, and the training can be quite extensive as well. Very often too, the training, if you're going to be conducting the training, it needs to be video recorded so that the owner has it, so that they can constantly retrain people, or if new people come in, they can be trained on the equipment as well. So contracts may require delivery to the owner, some extra items, things that wear out. So things that may wear out, or things that may need touching up, those kind of things. Extra ceramic tile, if something breaks, those kind of things. So sort of a spare parts log requirement. And As-built drawings may be a requirement, so then what are you supposed to turn over? We talked about BIM in this course, building information modeling, and it could be 6D BIM. Now you got another whole avenue of documentation, a whole database of information that you would have to turn over as part of that contract requirement. Or it could be as simple as the as-built documents that are being required. And usually you're going to want it in a digital format that the client would accept from that perspective. Also, most contracts require a 1-year warranty, but there may be extended warranties on particular items depending on what is in the contract. So you have to follow through and make sure that those are all met. And so again, you can see that closeout requires a checklist of information. We've talked about the value of checklists. So you have a standard checklist, and then you've customized the checklist for this particular project to ensure that you're meeting all the requirements and that makes it easier if possible. And so also, was there bonds on this project? So you also, a performance bond. So you have to have all the sign-off information for that is in place. And so indicates approval of contractors receiving final payment. So the consent of the surety, because now the project is complete and so they no longer have any concerns, that comes into play. So final payment cannot be made unless all the financial issues are settled and that everything is well documented. And at that point, it can be paid out. So this is particular too with the client. And if they've got a loan with a financial institution, they have to make sure that they've satisfied all their loan requirements before they're authorized to give the final payment amount, or the financial institution won't release that amount to them to make the final amount unless everything is in place. Also, part of that is, have you paid all of your subcontractors? Have you settled all the claims? We've talked about claims and change orders. Well, you want to settle out all the changes and claims so that then this can be signed off on. And there may be claims from subcontractors to you and from you to clients. Have this been all negotiated and signed off? Revised amount to the overall contracts amounts adjusted, so you have the final amount. Because again, we can see how all these other things that we've talked about throughout the course, they're all coming together now to make sure that we can get the payments done and completed. So these things have to be finalized and worked out, because that also affects the lien releases, the holdback amounts, etc. I want to release amounts if things are not settled with your subcontractors, because they could be putting a lien on the property. They typically have a time window that they have to meet, typically 45 days after they've completed their work. But you want to make sure that those things are all taken care of. So like I said, claims resolved, change orders, final contract amount adjusted for what it should be, and then all of these amounts and disputed items cleared. Final accounting for the project is in place now for profit or loss determination. So this is an internal process, reviewing how the project went, management's review of the project, and I'll get into that in a minute. And archiving your record. This can be very helpful as well. You're going to need information for tax purposes. You're going to need information for future references, for costing, etc. And this brings up, going back a couple, where you're doing this management review of the project. And so that's what I would call the project review. Some books, I think your textbook might call it project audit. I tend to like the word review better. Audit, kind of, having done this a lot in Ottawa, kind of sends chills up people's spines, thinking it's like a tax issue. It's not a tax issue. It's a project review. We're trying to determine how well we did on the project. And so I like this quote by George Santayana, and you've heard it before, I'm sure. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to relive it. Well, if there's been problems on this project, I don't want to have the same problems on the next project. So project review is the process of trying to figure out, how did we do on the project? And it means a lot of things. It means answering a lot of questions. It means, was this project profitable? Were the clients happy with the work? Did we have good relationships with the subcontractors and suppliers? Indeed, how would we rate our subcontractors, suppliers, and consultants, our key subcontractors, suppliers, and consultants? Are these people that we would want to work for again in the future? So how did the clients rate us? How do we rate that client? You have to remember there's also clients you may not want to work for in the future. It's good to have some understanding of that. It's estimated that more than 90% of projects are not reviewed. Usually the ones that are reviewed are the ones that are disasters. I would put it to you that you should just get it into your systems, the way this company operates, that they should review all their projects. You should make the process easy to do. It shouldn't be too complicated. If it's too complicated, then you won't do it. If you've done everything we've been mentioning through and we've been studying through this course, you know what, you'll have great documentation, so the review process isn't too difficult. As you further your studies, you would know which activities cost more. As I showed you in the previous lecture, when you update your schedule, you would know what the variances are in costs. And so that you'd ask the question, why? And what could we do better so that we don't have this issue again? Is it a problem in estimating? Do we have to provide feedback to our estimating department? Is it a problem in how we manage the site? Is there a better way of managing the site than we did in this particular project? Did we do some things really well? Did we make some extra money on certain activities that we didn't expect to? Why did we do that? How can we communicate that to the rest of the organization? How can we train the rest of the organization to be better at this? So a project review allows us to get that information in, and it really helps us look at things, not what to do, but what to do. Now we tend to be honest, we do tend to learn better from things that we've made mistakes on, because it kind of bothers us, and we tend to correct that better than things we do well. Sometimes things we do well we get complacent with, and we actually go a little bit downhill on. It's good to review both and understand both. And also, in many cases, we might have piloted something new on this project and it went well, but maybe it could be done better the next time with the feedback that we get. That ties into lean construction and continuous improvement thinking. Plan, do, check, act. Plan, do, study, act. PDCA or PDSA, they mean the same thing. And that process that we discussed earlier in the course. Well, this is great feedback then, so that we can continue that cycle of improvement. So what we call HPO, high performance organizations, are organizations that take this seriously, and they do it to their utmost to try to make improvements. If it's seen as a punishment tool, you know what? People are going to not be as transparent, not going to be as honest, not be as willing to participate in the process. So then it tends to be a failed process unto itself. So what we really want to do is make it a learning exercise to get better at what we're doing. And if we make it a positive in that sense, then that can be really, really helpful. So when we look at some guidelines, we want to make sure that we've got good data. So that means everything we've done in this course, we want to have done, and we want to have done it well and transparently and honestly and clearly. And then we have great data. Now it's just a matter of mining the data for the information. And that's why we should be doing the things that we need to do as described in this course. It needs to be quick and efficient. Again, if you got good programs and systems, and we talked about goals, programs, and systems, if we've got that and we've used it, we can access that data pretty quickly. And so we can make it a very efficient process. We can see which activities were over budget. We can see which activities took longer very quickly. We just have to filter the data out of our programs and systems. And how well did we reach our goals that we intended to with the project? So we really want to ask some questions too about the organization. You know, was the culture supportive for this scale of project? Did we get senior management support? Maybe the project failed because we didn't get access to the resources that we needed. So that's good feedback if that's the case. Because maybe management had 10 projects at the same time on the go, and your project suffered, whereas other projects gained because they were a higher profile or a higher priority. Well, at least that's good information. Did the project accomplish its intended purpose? Did we have clearly defined goals at the onset? How did we match up against those clearly defined goals? Going back to an earlier lecture, time, cost, quality, safety, scope. How did we do? Was there a gazillion change orders? What was the reason? Did we meet the quality expectations? Did we meet the time expectations? All of those come into play. Did we have the right people assigned to the project? Where could we have done better? And that gets into rating your subcontractors or supplier. And what did they think of us? Surveying them. Were contingency plans used? Were they realistic? Is the customer, at the end of the day, happy with our performance on this project? Some companies will call this client first feedback. What did they think of our performance? Just because we finished on budget and on time doesn't mean the client was happy. If you were a contractor and you were doing work in George Brown College or University of Toronto, and you were making tons of noise and interfering with the flow of classes in that facility, and you weren't really following the protocols that facilities laid out, even though you finished on time and on budget, probably not very happy with you, right? Because then there would have been all these complaints to the chairs and to the deans, and the deans would have complained to the president would have complained to the head of facilities would not be happy with you. So these are some ways of looking at things. And then you could ask yourself, well, how could we improve upon this in the future? So, and I've already mentioned the rating aspect of how people did. How was the team as a whole? How did they work together? Were they the right fit for this particular problem? And all these other points that I think I've pretty much mentioned in here. So all of these are important with a review. And classifying the project, analyzing the information gathering, having a series of recommendations, lessons learned, best practices, and figuring out also how we can communicate this across the organization. Small companies, not too hard to communicate. That's an advantage. They can be quick and nimble with this. Larger organizations, you have to look at different ways. Do you have a portal that you upload this information on? Do you have lunch and learns that you spread across the organization? Do you do some YouTube videos that basically helps to spread the information? Do you have educational training on specific areas where you see the company seems to be weak so that you can up yourselves and up your game? Those are some of the ways that you look at doing that. So at this point, we've encompassed everything that I wanted to cover in this particular site management course, and I appreciate you sticking to the end. I would appreciate feedback. I think you'll be getting course evaluations for this, so just like the review process here, I would appreciate if you took the time and actually filled out those course reviews that come electronically to you. I'd really appreciate it, because this is my first time doing this in this scale online, and so it helped me to make improvements for students that will come in the future as well. So again, I've enjoyed this course. I will do a review video for you, but this is the core content, and I've enjoyed doing this course online, but I would like some feedback just to get a good sense for myself to make it. I try to practice what I preach, and I hope you're going to, as a result of taking this course, take that on too, to continuously improve as you go through in your futures. So this is Tom Stephenson signing off, wishing you all the best in your careers and in your futures. Bye for now.